I'm thrilled with today's guest, Wendy Sachs. She is the director of October 8th, The Fight for the Soul of America, which is the #1 documentary in America. It's still in theaters. You can get it online also on demand. Welcome and congratulations. What an incredibly important film.
Thank you so much, Donnie. Thanks for having me on.
First, let's talk about getting it made, because this was not an easy one. It's not like you walked out to Hollywood and said, okay, I'm going to make a movie about anti-Semitism in America and the goings-on after October 7th. And you weren't exactly welcome with open arms.
That's true. Basically, wherever I went, people said, no one's going to touch it. Streamers won't touch it. Netflix won't touch it. Amazon, Hulu. They went down the list. Not only that, I mean, I was shopping it around I was going to, agents. I was going to UTA. I was going to CAA. I was going to Gersh. I was going to William Morris. I was trying to look for representation for the film. And people would take meetings with me. They would watch rough cuts of the film. And they would say, great film. Good for you. You go, girl. Like supporting me and saying this is really important. But sorry, can't touch it. We can't make money. And oh, by the way, there's a million other October 7th films out there, and they're not finding a home either. So it was a really sort of depressing landscape. I knew what I was going into. It was pretty surprising, but it even went deeper. People even getting attached to the project were having issues with it. People didn't want to put their name on it. We went to a very well-known, famous songwriter who writes, Academy Award-winning songs and has won multiple Grammys. She's Jewish. She started writing an original song for this film and then decided she wasn't going to do it. So we were getting it from all parts of the community and all parts of the industry.
What I was so moved. The film ends upliftingly with saying it's for the fight for the soul of America and talking about hope. But it was really rough to get through. It was really, reliving and forgetting that literally the day after October 7th in Times Square, there was protesting against Israel, and the people who had been slaughtered were all of a sudden were somehow the people that were criminals in this. And then you go in throughout the movie and really kind of talk about a lot of the genesis of this. And what was very chilling was in Philadelphia in 1993 meeting of top Hamas officers. Talk to me about that, because it was really the kind of the birth of a lot of what's going on.
Absolutely. It was really the revelatory moment in the film. And for me as the director was when I interviewed Lorenzo Vidino. He's the head of extremism at GW University, not Jewish, Catholic. And that was also very important to include non-Jews in this film as experts too. But what he told us, and this was like deep into production, we had already edited the scenes about SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, and their origin and who they were, and sort of the nefarious nature of those campus organizations. But what he told us was that in 1993, the FBI was wiretapping a Marriott hotel room in Philadelphia. And at the time, it was Hamas in America, Hamas members. They weren't actually categorized yet by the U.S. government as a terrorist organization. But as this conversation reveals, the Hamas members in America are trying to figure out how to strategize and how to best message their way into American society, how to make themselves palatable to an American audience. So when they're speaking to people on the left, they're going to speak in terms of apartheid and colonialism. And when they're speaking to people on the right, they're going to speak in terms of patriotism and the founding fathers. That actually was not included in the film, but that's part of the wiretap. And they also talk about how they're going to infiltrate the media and how they're going to get their way onto college campuses and universities. They were playing the long game. That is what is very clear, from this conversation that the FBI picked up and what we show in the film. This is 30 years in the making. So then it's not a surprise on October 8th, there is a media toolkit that gets circulated to college campuses across America. And they're being sent to SJP and to other, pro-Palestinians, pro-Hamas student organizations. They were ready to go. They had the messaging. They had the iconography that, we also show in the film, this upside down red triangle that Hamas uses to target IDF soldiers.
And they had a logo, like a branding campaign. It was a logo.
Absolutely. Yeah. They were like marketing, Donnie. You could appreciate that. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, reliving it and just watching these kids on these vile young people on campus spewing hate. The hate is so palpable. I'm going to ask you an impossible question to answer.
Yeah.
Why? Why this hatred for Jews, where there's 2.2% of the population, this Zionism equals Nazism. There's this extreme, insane hate mongering. Where, having done this film now, where's the genesis of this?
I mean, I truly think that there's this like irrational, fanatical, obsessive hate of Israel. I think that's what it comes from. It is like, yes, anti-Semitism is as old as time. And we show like it's morphed over the generations. It was racial. It was first, religious, and it was racial. Now it's anti-Zionism. And
just for our audience, to be very clear, all Zionism means is you believe there should be a state of Israel. And somehow they've co-opted that word to make it that it's some fanatical view of Judaism and some fanatical view of Israel, where all it means is there should be a Jewish state, period.
Zionism is just the self-determination of the Jewish people, straight up. That's what it is. It doesn't mean that there can't be a Palestinian state. It doesn't mean that Palestinians shouldn't have their rights. Zionism is just the self-determination of the Jewish people. That's all that it's about. But yeah, that term has been sort of hijacked, but it's not a new thing that it's been hijacked.
No.
Zionism as a dirty word has actually existed for a very, very long time. We actually show in the film what happened in the 50s and in the Arab world and in the former Soviet Union. It was always, we have nothing against the Jews. It's just the Zionists. Right. Yeah. So that has just been a dirty word. But I think more recently, it has really been sort of usurped on college campuses as the ultimate, boogeyman. It is like the worst of the worst.
The oppressor, the ultimate oppressor. Everything, they tied every single thing, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Save the Kangaroos, climate change. Anything is equivalent. If you stand for anything of oppressor versus oppressed, you stand against Israel and against Zionism.
That's exactly right. We show this intersectionality, right? Like exactly what you're saying. If you're for climate change, if you're for minority rights, if you are for reproductive freedom, then you must be for the Palestinian cause / pro-Hamas. I mean, and that's also where it's been so muddled. And I think that a lot of these young people think they're on the right side of the issue. I don't think that we have campuses in America that are full of haters and full of anti-Semites. I don't
know if I agree with that, particularly after watching the film. But okay, go ahead.
We definitely listen. I think there are definitely people who do believe that Jews are rich, white, colonialist oppressors. But I don't think all of the students who are camping out in those spring encampments that we show in the film, are that. I think that they think they're doing the right thing, and that honestly, that their brains have been hijacked by social media and the propaganda that's been pushed out, not just from actors here in the state, but honestly from like foreign actors coming from Russia and Iran and China, who are trying to atomize the American population, who are trying to, like the same thing that they did at the 2016 election, they're trying to divide us. And they are successful. And by the way, the narrative on the other side is pretty effective. And their images are very powerful. And their PR, again, they're sophisticated. This is not, they are savvy. They know what they're doing.
What was a chilling fact, I think Galloway brought it up, and I've talked about this, is that on TikTok, you will see 52-1 pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas videos versus pro-Israeli, pro-Jewish videos. 52-1. So there's no wonder that 70 or 80% of young people today are on the side against Israel.
Listen, someone's got their finger on the scale, and that's what we're showing too. And that's what Scott Galloway is also showing, is that it's not organic. It's not authentic. We know it's being manipulated. The hashtags are being manipulated. At the same time, listen, the Jewish community, and we show this in the film, is the minority of the minority of the minority. We are less than 3% of the U.S. population, 3%, less than 3%. And so we are definitely outnumbered. And to be sort of
yet it's only 3%, but yet over 50% of the hate religious crimes have been against Jews in the last year or two.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. The data just shows, the FBI data shows that the level of hate and targeting to the Jewish community is, many, many more times than to the Muslim community or to any other community. So what's sort of enraging, I think, to so many, and we bring up in the film with one of our students who is half Afghan Muslim and half Jewish, and she's a student at MIT.
She's incredible,
and she says, yeah, the problem, is that at MIT, they refuse to acknowledge anti-Semitism on campus. In every conversation, and we see this over and over again at universities, and we saw this with the former administration, it was always anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the same sentence. It is not happening at the same levels. The students are not being targeted at the same levels, and we need to call out what it is. The problem is anti-Semitism right now.
Particularly chilling was rewatching the university presidents, the president of Penn, the president of Harvard, not be able to clarify and simply say that, genocide against Jews is hate speech and should not belong on campus. And obviously they've lost their jobs. But even now looking back, how ridiculously absurd and tone deaf that was.
Completely tone deaf. I mean, they looked like they were all like, deers in headlights. They had terrible legal advice, all from the same law firm. I think that was a pivotal moment for so many in the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community, just watching that and watching the hypocrisy. And I mean, Scott Galloway speaks to it so beautifully in the film. There is no way that he could walk around NYU and say, he's going to go lynch, the Black students or the gay students or the Hispanic students or the indigenous students, and that would be okay. But there is something happening where Jews are just not considered an oppressed group or a minority. And so they're not deemed the same sort of level of, of a privilege, I guess, to be a protected class. And there's just a refusal to believe that Jews are under siege.
I early on called out the media and called out Hollywood for their silence. Mm-hmm. Why was the media so late to the game? Why was not only late to the game, but on the wrong side of the game in so many issues, whether it was reporting about the hospital bombing that they blamed on Israel, that they walked back but did it quietly. Why was the media, and why is the media still, in my mind, so biased against Israel?
Yeah, they still are. It hasn't changed. I think it comes from a few different places. I think it's this like Venn diagram that's created this perfect storm. So you have young people in newsrooms, who, and there is definitely an age difference with how people sort of feel about Israel. There's no question, younger people today and younger people in newsrooms absolutely believe that, I don't want to say all, I don't want to paint this broad stroke picture, but they question the legitimacy of the state of Israel. They question that there should be a Jewish state at all. And I think that is sort of the foundation and the root of the problem. These are not people, and we saw this on college campuses too, when we, by the way, would not have had a film if the people protesting were saying, we want two states, we want peace. Instead, I was sitting in mobs, hearing, shouting, one state, we want it all. So we start with an ideology, and a lot of that ideology has been fostered on college campuses. And a lot of the people sitting in newsrooms at the most sort of, well-known branded media organizations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, they're coming from Columbia University, they're coming from Barnard, they're coming from NYU. They're coming from my alma mater, Northwestern, who, by the way, and I went to journalism school, Medill, but there's a campus in Doha, Qatar, that has a relationship, or did until about 6 weeks ago, had a relationship with Al Jazeera. So you have, young people who are now in newsrooms and now have, levels of power who have been steeped in an ideology that has been very anti-Zionist. And that's a complicated conversation to have and how we got there. And that's going to be my next project. But there's that. And then there's the NGOs, so the Amnesty International, the Human Rights Watch, these organizations that are like the moral authority on human rights. And we've seen, and we document in the film, that over the years, over the decades, you have Amnesty and Human Rights Watch constantly calling out Israel as this apartheid state, an apartheid regime. There's a colonial oppressor. And you have journalists who look to these organizations, because they trust them. They're the ones who are collecting the data and doing the reporting. And they look to those organizations. And if they're calling out Israel as the pariah state among all nations, the worst of the worst, those journalists who don't maybe know much more assume that's the facts and that's the truth. And then you have just media trusting the stringers in Gaza or the West Bank who are connected to Hamas and cannot be impartial. They're relying on them for news. So it is just so sort of corrupt at such a sort of complicated, deep level. That I think is why we're seeing so much bias. But it really stems from an ideology.
It does. So we know what college campuses look like, and the film documents it after October 7th through the spring, through June. How different are college campuses today if we walk through them? I know we don't, it's not as much in the news. Mm-hmm. It certainly has quote unquote calmed down, but it's still there. It's still there.
It's definitely still there. I mean, I think that the temperature has definitely cooled off since last spring for a few reasons. I do think that there's a lot of pressure coming from the Trump administration right now. There's no question that, withholding $400 million from Columbia University is effective.
It's a wake up call. That when you hit them in the pocketbook, they wake up. They tend to wake up.
Yeah, and they're being aggressive. Listen, the administration is very aggressive. They're targeting them. There's a list. Northwestern's on that list. They're going after them soon. And I think that, there is pressure coming from alumni and just donors to these universities that are withholding money and saying, you guys need to do something. Trustees, college presidents, administrators, they need to do something to address really what has just become sort of an insidious, pervasive level of anti-Semitism that's so deeply sort of embedded in these institutions. So the climate's come down, but we're still seeing things at Harvard and at Barnard and at other campuses.
So I'm going to ask the question again, and it's a tough one. Why is it that if you stand up and say, I want to kill black people, or I want to kill gay people, or I want to kill Mexican people, there is no gray area? When it comes to Jews, there's still an asterisk, there's still a but, there's still a gray area. Why? Yeah, why the F is that?
I mean, I think it's historic. I think it's ancient. I honestly think it goes back millennia. We have always been the scapegoat. We have always been targeted. It is so it's almost at like a cellular level baked into culture for millennia now. And it's listen, it's enraging, and I think it hits us so deeply because again, we are such a small minority, but to be fair, we punch above our weight. And we're over-indexed in a lot of industries. And so I think that the tropes that, Jews run the media, Jews run Hollywood, Jews run the banks, Jews control the money. All of those really, tropes and, / anti-Semitic slurs, we are over-indexed in a lot of these areas. And so that's this sort of perception. So if you're Jewish and if you're powerful and if you're rich, you cannot be oppressed. That's the sort of, the binary here. And that is what has been cultivated also in academia. I mean, this is part of, DEI. This is part of, even goes back, quite frankly, to Edward Said at Columbia University, who published a book back in 1978 called Orientalism, which really started this whole movement that in the Middle East Studies departments about how you're teaching history. And, in his world, in his Orientalism world, Jews were not part of the Middle East. And I mean, it goes so deep, and it's been going on for decades now in academia. But the sort of attack on Jews is as old as time.
Sheryl Sandberg is incredibly compelling in the film. She talks about, you interview her, and she actually gets very choked up in talking about the double standard when it came to women being sexually abused as part of the terrorist massacre on October 7th versus how women around the world, people around the world have stood up for what happened, the atrocities in Nigeria. But somehow this one was a quiet one.
Yeah, I mean, that we're showing these sort of, again, the double standards where, I mean, where's Michelle Obama, right? The abduction of hundreds of schoolgirls from Boko Haram, a terrorist organization, not unlike Hamas. The entire world was holding up signs saying, bring back our girls. And yet there was silence. And I think that sense of abandonment is one of the things that moved me to making this film and getting on it as quickly as I did, because it was, where is everyone? One of the questions I would ask people all the time when I was doing interviews and we were talking about the sexual violence and the silence and the dismissal of what had happened was, I would say, is it Israelis or is it Jews? Like, if it were Jewish girls who were kidnapped from Los Angeles, would we be seeing the same amount of silence and denial? And, some people would say yes, others would say no, because I was trying to get to the root. Is it really about Israel? It's about that they're Israelis and they're Jews. But by the way, not everyone was Jewish. We know who was murdered and abducted and all of that. But I wanted to really sort of unpack, if there is a way to unpack that and to separate it. And I would get different answers. But my answer to you is it's both. But I do think that it's that sort of absolute fanatical hate of Israel and anti-Zionism that has brought us to this place where people couldn't even see the fact that they were, that girls were raped, murdered, mutilated, and abducted.
So we're 18 months or so away from October 7th, the atrocities. Tell me what is better and tell me what is worse as far as the state of the Jews and the state of Israel today.
Well, I think as a community, Jews have woken up. Sheryl Sandberg said that. We've spoken about that. I think my initial log line when I wrote the treatment at the end of October 2023 was, on October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel, and October 8th, American Jews woke up. Because I saw that right away. There was WhatsApp groups that were blowing up, days after.
I know I, as a Jew, got so in touch with my Judaism, with my Jewishness as a result of this atrocity, and a lot of people did. It woke us up, and if there was ever any single lining, we became stronger, and we bonded more, and we became very aware of who we were.
I could not agree more. I mean, even people like Scott Galloway, others, Dan Senor, who had said, I didn't even realize there was anti-Semitism. Someone who's sort of steeped in knowing about Israel and writing about all these things was so blown away by the level of it. It's just like erupting. So I think on a positive, the Jewish community has really come together. There's a sense of, okay, we know our identity, we need to punch back. Because I also think there's been a sense that we've been asleep at the wheel. So for decades, while Hamas has been planting the seeds and messaging and hijacking the brains of young people, but also foreign money coming into universities and funding chairs and funding Middle East studies departments and getting into academia and getting into K through 12. It's not just universities. It's K through 12 in America and in Canada. I'm actually talking to you from Toronto right now, and I'm hearing so much of what's happening here in Canada too. So it's time that the Jewish community sort of really wake up. And as someone said to me, a few people have said this, instead of Jews putting their names on the buildings, and putting their name on a library or on a medical center, they need to sort of, start funding the curriculum, start funding the academia, and really sort of unpacking what's being taught in schools and getting in there where it's more important rather than putting their name on something.
Just drifting into politics, at Gallup, I saw a stunning poll that 83% of Republicans have a favorable view of Israel, and only 33% of Democrats have a favorable view of Israel. That's a big fucking problem.
It's a big problem. And what's also so ironic is, listen, the Jews, 70% of American Jews are registered Democrats. So Jews
That's going to start to change. That's going to start to change. I know for me, I am really, really struggling being a Democrat these days. I'm more of an independent.
And so many people agree with that. I mean, I think so many people are feeling that. Again, I think the Jewish community feels abandoned by the Democratic Party. So many people have been so quiet and silent because, again, there's this idea of if you're, pro-Israel, somehow you're, anti-Muslim or you're Islamophobic. And it's like this binary that's been positioned. It's bizarre. And this also idea that, what's really sort of crazy, to be honest, is the real sort of, left progressive folks in the Democratic Party, those who support LGBTQ rights and indigenous rights and all of the other rights that you're championing for people who actually have historically been oppressed, for them to actually think It's better in the Islamic world. That is better in Yemen.
Yeah.
It's better in Gaza.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Let's all ship them. Let's have a month vacation over there in Gaza. See how that works out for you.
I mean, you see the queer flags flying next to the Houthi flags at Columbia University. I was there. I captured all of this. None of it makes sense. I mean, it's so like we're in like a dystopia. And people have lost their minds. So you don't understand that Israel is the most gay-friendly country in the Middle East and one of the most in the world. And, so none of it makes any sense. It's completely irrational. But again, I think that people, they've been misled. You read the New York Times, and not to just totally hate on the New York Times because they can do some good journalism, but it's sort of extraordinary to see what headlines say and the positioning and the sort of bias that just gets embedded in their reporting. It makes, and this is why a lot of people have canceled their subscriptions.
So what's the next project you touched on?
So the next project is called Poison Ivy, and it's really unpacking academia. It's how we got to this moment in academia. So, October 8th is how did we get to this moment where Hamas is being celebrated as freedom fighters rather than as terrorists? College campuses and all these places. Poison Ivy is really going to get to understand what's happening in academia, the impact of foreign funding coming into universities, what that's meant. They've bought their way into the Ivies, but also looking at K through 12 and what needs to be done.
Wendy Sachs, so appreciate your time and how busy you are. The film is October 8th. It's still in theaters. It's on demand. Jewish, not Jewish, American, not American. Really important film to watch. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Johnny.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.